Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Adrian Bo podcast featuring Troy Malcolm, AB. So good to see you for episode number 129. We are getting closer and closer to that 150 mark. And to be honest, AB, I didn't think we'd get here. I'm actually pleasantly surprised. I'm very humbled on the feedback we get from all our listeners. To all the listeners that are online right now, make sure you smash that like button, follow us, send 5 stars, send AB a text message, email, Instagram post on how much you love the content, and continue to send in your questions, because that really gives us credibility out there in the market, Adrian. We want to make sure that this is as relevant as possible. It's not two talking heads. We're actually working with our clients that we have become very close to over the past couple of years. Now, before we begin, mate, it goes without saying, how are you?
Very, very good. Thanks, Troy. And obviously, it'd be remiss not to share the recent news of your return, if you like, to the McGrath Network. So congratulations.
Yeah,
and
thank
certainly
you.
great to be linking arms with John McGrath again. And yeah, obviously the three of us are very close friends and have regular catch-ups. And terrific to definitely for you to return and take quite a senior leadership position within that business.
Yeah, it's a really exciting time, I think, Adrian. There seems to be a number of key leadership roles around all the industry that are moving, and I was presented with an amazing opportunity to rejoin the McGrath business. As most of our listeners know, I was there for over 20 years alongside you. I think I still remember the first day I walked into the original Edgecliff office, and you were there with the team doing a training session. So very exciting to be linking back up with John. I've been in now for a couple of days, and it feels like it's back to normal. It's back to the early starts with John. And those that know John know that he's very early, and he does like a phone call or a text normally before 6 a.m. But it's actually it's very exciting, Adrian. So thank you very much, and watch this space, because I think there's a number of exciting announcements that the industry will be making as a whole. I continually go to the main platforms and also the comms platforms and see some remarkable activities, people joining businesses growing, acquisitions happening. So I think it's that time of the cycle, Adrian, that we do see quite a bit of movement. And to be honest, Adrian, when we think about the cycle, it's kind of relevant we talk a little bit about the cycle, because right now we're seeing in pockets around Australia, actually the majority of pockets, there's a slight shift. And so the questions that we're going to cover off today in our Q&A are really based around how do we overcome a shifting market. Now, there's quite funny, the questions that we're going to answer 4 of them today. They all have a similar tone, but what we've decided to do is break them up into the segments of our clients and give you a few key tips to overcome them. Adrian, you've seen this yourself in your pocket, a slight shift in activity from both buyers, sellers, the market, prices, all encompassing, and even auction stock. Why is it important to make sure that we're match fit right now to really outpace the market in this particular topic?
Yeah, so I think what the industry needs to understand is we're back to a normal market, where the last couple of years has been quite anomalous and quite an abnormal market. Frankly, it's been unprecedented to observe and experience 22, 23% growth, whatever it might be in some particular pockets. Any double digit growth of any variation within a 12-month period is unusual. So I think normal markets are markets where you would get 4 or 5 registrations at an auction, not 15 or 18. And normal markets are where you may end up with 1 or 2 serious buyers on each property, regardless if it's auction or for sale. And a normal market is, the average day on market might be, anywhere between 14 to 30, not 2 to 7. So I think that's the first thing, just acknowledging that wasn't the norm. It was the exception that we've just experienced. And the norm is probably here to stay for a little while. Cycles are called cycles for that reason, that they do tend to fluctuate and manic in nature. So I think that's the first thing, accepting and acknowledging that. And the experienced agents, or even agents who understand buyer social, demographic, and also their mindset and vendors' mindset as well around the current market, will perform a lot better than either unexperienced agents or agents that don't understand buyer psychology or seller psychology. So I think we need to acknowledge that, number one. Number two, we need to definitely double down on communication. That's with all stakeholders of the transaction, Troy. So that's the buyers, the sellers, the solicitors, the tradespeople. Like, communication is going to be key. I think that the industry has done a full circle. We went from a very much a cottage-based local immersion community type business into a very corporate space, and I think it's evolved back into that high tech, yes, but very, very, very high touch and local community and over communication, more back to that face to face. There's an insatiable appetite now for face to face, given the void of 2 years where that has been a challenge due to COVID. So we look, to answer your question, it's number one, acknowledging we are where we are and we're a normal market. Number two is really making sure over communication, as much face-to-face communication with all stakeholders, just for full transparency, and to be that trusted advisor that is providing feedback, whether it's to a buyer or a seller, indiscriminately. What I mean by that is, you can't just be there as a blue sky merchant. You can't just be there when the campaign's going well. You need to have a robust conversation to provide recommendations as a doctor, lawyer, accountant would, to not just identify an issue, but to provide multiple solutions in order to rectify that issue.
Yeah, I think you're right. The way that the most experienced agents and those that have lived through a number of cycles in their real estate career, they're actually very excited about this market. And, you see it time and time again when these shifts happen, or a normal market occurs, or an upshift. It's those that are willing to embrace the change, as you said, and really go with it, instead of dwelling in the past or being that blue sky optimist, that really do see the benefits and see the success. Adrian, you mentioned buyers and sellers, and we're going to give a couple of tips to our clients, our listeners right now, around how to manage and over communicate to them. So let's start with the buyers if we can. What are some of the things that your team and your clients are doing in regards to buyer communication? You said we've got to double down on it. What are 2 or 3 of the top tips that you're doing right now out there in the market to make sure that buyers are fully across the detail and are sticking with the property to perform at the right moment?
Yeah, so it goes back as a segue from what, that first point was the over communication, and then going back to those face to faces, because again, people have this insatiable appetite now to get in front of more people. I think, Zoom, FaceTime, isolating, working from home, it has become quite fatiguing, and, all humans need interaction. So, I'm finding, certainly with my immediate team and the coaches, the agents that I'm coaching directly, if we're talking about buyers, I'm highly encouraging, given the reduction in number of qualified buyers, especially leading into an auction campaign. If you're going to have 3 or 4 registrations rather than 14, book a time and get face-to-face for 20 minutes rather than that default approach in an abnormal market where you would have a very tidy short list of buyers. You would call them twice a week leading into an auction campaign, or even if it's just for sale, people who have taken contracts, and you would just touch base with them and say, just letting you know the auction's still on track, are you still planning to come, etc., etc. That's not going to cut it anymore, because that type of surface communication, if you will, is not substantial enough, because all sins were forgiven in an abnormal market where you could guide and guess. You had a price guide and you guessed buyers were 10% above that. That's not going to cut it anymore. So what we're doing, and what I'm encouraging all my clients to do, is if you do have 3 or 4 buyers on a property, spend 20 minutes. That's a highly dollar productive activity, to have a face-to-face meeting and ask very direct questions to provide very direct responses, which could be, where do you see value bidding to, and where do you see yourself as a maximum if it was a competitive auction? And some people might think, well, no one's going to tell you that. You'd be surprised. And then that way you can provide accurate feedback and also look at your metrics. Have they taken a contract? What else have they done apart from that? Been through a couple of times, changes to the contract, pest and building inspection. What are the other metrics there? So I think over communicating, over analysing, and full transparency with buyers, and will provide you a better recommendation to your seller, therefore a more accurate result, come auction day in terms of expectations and current reality.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing, Adrian, is speak to them early, speak to them frequent, and make sure you understand how deep they're going, right? So if they've missed out on a property, what was the expectation there? The progressing of buyers that we've spoken about a lot, but it's more and on more intimate level. So really getting to know them, and don't leave anything to chance. Don't wait until the last week. If they're a contract holder, to say, oh, you're still coming to the auction, those days are definitely gone. You've got to get on early and go hard with them to make sure that they understand the circumstances. Now, Adrian, similar to that, I think the same recipe for success would be applicable to vendors, but is there anything else you're doing in regards to the vendors right now around their strategy to see a successful result?
I do feel, Troy, that pricing the property sensibly, to start with, is important. There was some issues, I think, with some of the early auctions in the year, given they were listed in November, with November expectations, and then there was some adjusting to conduct, and some education around not historical data, which were 2021 sales, but actual relevant sales, which were 2022 sales. The same as what a valuer would look at, Troy, if they were deployed on behalf of a financial institution for refinancing or purchase. They wouldn't look at October, November sales. They'd look at the last few weeks. So I think that's important, number one. Number two is whether we call it a set to sell meeting or an expectation meeting, and we've spoken about that ad nauseum on this podcast. Really just making sure that you're providing owners the options around what the potential scenarios could be on a week-to-week basis. And what does that sound like? Well, it's Troy just letting you know that my metric to know whether we're on track or not for this Saturday is going to be 10 groups. If there's going to be less than 10 groups when we chat next week, we certainly do have solutions at our disposal, which we can control pricing, we can control marketing, we can control presentation. We can't control Ukraine, we can't control interest rates, we can't control the floods, we can't control a change of government. The list goes on. And also you can't control the fact that the house might have a block of units next to it, or it's a narrow street, or there's an easement in the back. I mean, all those things which, if you focus on, become your reality. But if you market a property like your life depends on it, you present it like your life depends on it, and you over communicate with buyers and sellers on transparent pricing, then it's very hard not to sell a property in this market. Very hard not to sell.
Perfect. Now, Adrian, anyone that's out there, as we start to wrap up this episode, anyone that's out there that may have been listening to this for the first time, haven't gone through our expectations, our pricing alignment, our buyer management strategy, they may have had an auction or a property that's just had extended days on market. What are some of the things that they can be doing if their property passed in on the weekend and the level of interest is not at the level that the vendors are willing to accept? What are some of the things that they can be doing out there right now to try and get and pull together a successful result?
Yeah, great question. I actually wrote a piece on REB about this in particular, with a bit of a checklist there. So if anyone wants to take a deeper dive, just go to the REB website and look for my article there. So a few things, because we won't have time to go through all of them, but the first thing we need to do is identify with a fixed price. Now, and even in Queensland, we're allowed to do this with private treaty, okay? So that's a fixed published price. The biggest mistake agents make when a property doesn't sell is not acknowledge and embrace the attraction of private treaty from a buyer's perspective. And the attraction of private treaty or private sale from a buyer's perspective is a published fixed asking price, or call it a buy now price if we want to use sort of gig economy type language, right? So that's the first thing, because price ranges or unpublished pricing, it could work for an auction strategy, but you're now in a private treaty or private sale environment. Embrace the advantages of that, which is appealing to buyers who can identify with a fixed price. That's the first thing you need to do. In terms of how you price that depends on each situation, each motivation, each client, each campaign, how it's performed, etc. Secondly, you need to review the campaign over the last 30 days, and whatever you did, you need to do it differently, right? So, if we were using the same hero shot, let's change it. If we didn't have a social media boost, let's do that. If we didn't have a video, well, let's look at that. If we didn't have audience maximizer on REA, let's have a look at that. If we didn't have dream homes on domain, let's have a look at that. If we didn't do just listed letters or flyers in the local community, or at a buyer origin suburb where you've identified, for example, a buyer is usually originated from one suburb and moves to the other, have a look at that. And then can you also do the same in terms of geo-targeting on Facebook? Yes, you can. So let's have a look at that. The list goes on. There's just, but the message is review what's happened, identify the gaps, and plug those gaps, because there's no empty houses in Australia. That property has a buyer. We just need to price it well, present it well, market it well, and ensure that we're on top of it, proactively taking a pulse on it every 48 hours from that point to ensure that we identify that right buyer.
Yeah, and the golden rule as well, Adrian, that you and I have always worked with is the fact that if it does pass in at auction, that is simply the first stage campaign. The second stage campaign is making it a full sale or a private treaty property online. So there's never a failed campaign. Like Adrian just said, you've got to price it well, you've got to promote it well, and you've got to make sure that it's presented in a way that buyers will be attracted to that property. AB, I want to thank you. We are running out of time very quickly. I know how busy you are. We've had to reschedule this meeting twice this morning. We meant to do it late yesterday afternoon, and we had to reschedule this morning because you were caught on a call. This is now locked in, guys. Episode number 129 coming to you, the Adrian Bowe podcast featuring Troy Malcolm. We will be back with episode number 130 with you next week. To everyone that does tune in all the time, thank you so much for listening. We really enjoy your feedback. So again, like I said at the start of this podcast, make sure you jump online, you rate us 5 stars, you leave a review. AB, your book as well, why I think about it, your book is getting phenomenal reviews. I keep seeing all over social media that people are watching that. That's available at Amazon as well. So if you can't find it on Adrian's website, go to Amazon and search for Adrian's book. AB, thank you again. Episode number 129, signing off. Until next week, I'm Troy Malcolm. That's Adrian Bowe. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Troy. Thanks, listeners.